Hi, friends. You are listening to the EntreEd Talk podcast, where we feature amazing educators and entrepreneurs showcasing how you can bring entrepreneurship into the classroom. We believe entrepreneurship is for everyone. I am your host, Toy Hirschman, and I am so glad you chose to join me on this journey. Let's go. Welcome back, everybody, to another fun episode of the EntreEd Talk podcast. I am delighted to have with me here today, Maceo Jourdan. I am going to have him introduce himself as we've been doing for the last few episodes. It seems to work out better. It's much more exciting. So welcome, Maceo. I'm so excited to have you today.
I'm really excited to be here. I owe a lot of where I am today to some really fine educators in my past. So, I've got a lot of affinity for educators. I've been a coach myself for a long time. And so I started coaching in high school. I was teaching martial arts on an Air Force base here in Arizona. And weirdly enough, even as a kid, I realized that if I learned something with the intent of teaching it, that I would gain a greater mastery over it. And that's martial arts taught me that in a very visceral way. So I took that with me as I progressed through my career. But I've been everything from in the military. I joined when I was 17. I wanted to be a Green Beret, which is really weird because my mom was, like a diehard civil rights activist. She had a group on Berkeley called the Brown Berets. So very much not in line with the typical military family. So obviously I didn't fit in. Got out, got accepted at MIT. And frankly, was just afraid. I didn't think I deserved to go. I thought I'd be in over my head. So I came back home, instead studied physics at ASU. That led to a long career in the hedge fund markets. So I started trading options, and then that led to getting into some funds. That blossomed into computerized trading around 2001. And then that led me to digital marketing. And if I'll try and weave in like how all of that's relevant. But really I was fortunate to have been introduced to computers in the 6th grade. It was actually this class for gifted students, which I swear was the CIA program. To this day, I will swear it was organized by the Central Intelligence Agency because it was pretty weird. But we got introduced to the TI-80 computer. I'm dating myself for sure. But ever since then, I've been fascinated with technology and computers. But really, as a result of that educator, she was, my goodness, she loved computers and was really excited, and that rubbed off on me as a young student. She had some failings in other areas, which we can get to, but that's where my love of computing began, and where I really saw that technology was properly applied, really going to give us a lot of leverage going forward.
Wow. Yeah. I just need to know how you made a jump from physics at ASU to hedge fund.
Some of that's personality, right? It's so physicists generally want to explore what's real, right? And so you can have your opinion about the way things work, and then you can go find out how they really work, right? And so that is at its essence, I think, science. It's like, hey, let's all come up with these ideas of how stuff should go, and then we'll experiment and see if we can reproduce it. Which, of course, shows my hand. I'm not a mathematical theoretical physicist where I'm willing to just, throw a bunch of equations out there and then hand it off to the engineers and say, okay, go do something with this. I'm a hybrid of the two. And so that's what led me to the markets. The markets lends to very complicated mathematical theory, and none of them work because of the way the market actually works. So what I figured out, like a physicist would, was, okay, I've got this theory. Let me apply it over here. Okay, that was a big failure. Let me figure out why that didn't work. And through that scientific process, was able to devise a very successful trading program.
Wow. That's really amazing. So no candlestick charts for you then, or is that?
That's a funny discussion. So Steve Nissan, who's kind of popularized candlesticks in the States, and I had some very brief exchanges, and they were brief because I was just challenging his data. And so it's great. You say that candlesticks work. Why? How? Where? How did you test it? What was your methodology? And unfortunately, in the market specifically, because there's this promise of future riches, our human failings start to kick in, right? So all of things like hindsight bias, the average bias, like so if you ask a room, who's an average driver, nobody raises their hands, but it's like, well, by definition, somebody in the room has to be average, right? So all of our human failings kind of kick in, and Steve was definitely at the mercy of those. I mean, and on top of it, what he missed was that the Japanese were very much in tune with the softer side of candlesticks, which was showing on screen or quantifying on screen human intent, and then how that intent was reflected by the other market participants. Now, trust me, I love the market. So if you keep asking me questions there, we will definitely turn this into the trading interview.
I don't know. No, for those of you out here don't know what a candlestick chart is. It's just a way that you can sort of predict how things are going to happen. I read a book about it once, and in the markets, and I got like to some kind of star that was floating on the down. I don't know. And I went,
morning stars and evening stars.
Yeah. Like this is way too complicated for me.
Yeah. The Japanese are very much a poetic society. So that their culture obviously was imprinted on candlesticks. And that, I think, is what Steve missed the most, is he missed that, and this is the beautiful thing about the Asian cultures, is that they are so layered, and they have, which again was something that was imparted to me by some educators, and their language and their culture are blended to the point where when you look at something written, especially if it's calligraphy, it speaks to multiple levels. And that's candlestick charts. It wasn't necessarily a predictive medium as it was designed to reveal to you what was hidden behind the data. So it's trying to bring to the surface what people are thinking and how they're reacting to the market as it unfolds.
It's a cool concept, but again, it was like whoop, way above my head.
And unfortunately, I think Steve's, but he's the author and doesn't, most people who write books don't like guys like me coming in and saying, hey, it's great that, you wrote this book, but you really don't know what you're talking about, which leads to my personality. If you look at a Big Five analysis, so Big Five is a personality test that's backed by just a mountain of statistics. So it's a very good way to put broad categories on, yourself as a person. And so one of them is politeness, not please and thank you politeness, but more like giving people respect just because of their position. So it's like, oh, hey, he's in charge, I'm going to give him respect. Well, I don't give people any. So in a room of 100 people, I will literally be the least polite person in the room.
You didn't do well in that category.
No, in any category, actually. I mean, I challenged everybody, and it wasn't, I didn't mean to do that in a way that was disrespectful, but that's how it comes across, because in most cultures, people, they feel that if they're in that position of authority, that they should be and have as a right, that level of respect and deference. But even in physics, I say, well, how are you going to discover anything unless someone just comes in and like plain-facedly challenges your theory? It's like, no, I think you're wrong, and let's go prove it.
That's awesome. You think some of that's happening right now with the quantum people versus the Newtonian people? Just nerd curious.
It is, and so you can go back to what are called the Michelson and Morley experiments. And I'll say it right here. Einstein was wrong. And so Michio Kaku, I always mess up his name. All of these physicists that are using that relativistic model are using a model that is based on Einstein literally inserting a number to make his equations work. Lorentz did it all. So all these mathematicians said, we're going to dream up a theory. And then they did the math. Like, oh, shoot, this math doesn't work. Well, let me make it work. Gravitational constant. Well, it's like, come on. That doesn't even make any sense. So when I was in a physics class, one of the first questions I asked when I got into the PhD program was, okay, you say that you can't accelerate to the speed of light. And I said, well, then where does a photon come from? So I'm looking at an incandescent bulb, put a battery on it. it turns on. So light wasn't there, now light is there. So one, where does that photon come from? And if, as you say, the photon is created, then it's going from 0 to the speed of light. Didn't you just tell me you can't do that? And I didn't get an answer. So I said, well, that's what I want to do with my PhD. Let's go investigate that. And literally the PhD department at ASU said, you can't do that. They said, if it's not in the book, you can't do your thesis. And this gets to some of what Eric Weinstein is talking about now, Weinstein, about, the flaws in academia when it comes to like high level science. It's really this mill of grant money and, furthering somebody else's research. And they really don't like it when you come in and challenge, especially a schmo like me who's going to come in and literally just say, nope, Einstein was wrong. And he's wrong because you can just look at it. He invented the math. Why are we even discussing any of this? But then you can also look experimentally, Michelson, Morley, there are roughly 200,000 experiments which prove that Einstein's special relativity was wrong, which of course then means general relativity has some flaws in it. Obviously you can see from my personality, like I've got no problem in throwing that out. It's like some random dude in Arizona, who cares? But that leads to, like you said, like you asked originally, how do you go from physics to hedge fund to digital marketing to entrepreneurship? It was that very early on, my teachers, I don't know if they recognized that personality trait, but they didn't squash it, more importantly. They saw that I was a little bit beyond just curiosity as a kid. Like I would look at something and then I would go off and try and build something. And I remember even as a young child with erector sets, again, dating myself, where if I saw something, I would try and duplicate that. Or if I didn't really think it was right, I would try and figure it out. So those early educators really fanned those flames, which later on led to me getting into these varied, endeavors and businesses. And I think at the root of it, the reason why I was able to go as far as I was because I didn't get into that box-like thinking. So we say things like, think outside the box. Well, it's easier for me because of my personality, because when an expert comes in and says, no, Maceo, here's your box, I'm going to say, well, why? Because you say so? Like, that's not enough. Let me look at your actual work. And then if the work is like, oh, wow, that's a really interesting box. Now let's go do something with it. Then I'll use it. And so that definitely enabled me to jump from one to the next. But it also enables me to unabashedly take something from a totally random experience and apply it directly, if for no other reason than just like, hey, let's see if it's going to work. And in business and in marketing, I can't tell you how many times that has just proven to be the case, meaning something that everybody says isn't going to work actually works. So an example, early in digital marketing, everybody said, oh, you have to have these really short, what's called a conversion funnel. Conversion funnel means let's say you put up a web page that says, hey, sign up to my free course. Everybody's seen those. And then you go through a set number of steps. That's what is called a funnel, because it's supposed to, funnel you down from this mass of people to a quote buyer. Well, everybody said, oh, that has to be 3 pages or 5 pages. And I said, really? So what I did is I kept adding pages to my process until universally everybody I ran into said it's not going to work. And then I tested it. And the results were quite literally off the charts. 80% page-to-page conversion. By the time people got to the end of it, 98% of them bought. And then the basis of it was literally a process where all the quote experts were in agreement that it wasn't going to work, which goes back to what the markets taught me, which is the crowd in the markets generally is always wrong. And so again, taking all this together, because I saw in this place where you have massive amounts of people, everybody's got their opinion and they're backing up that opinion with money. When I see in that environment that the crowd is generally wrong, my brain immediately says, oh, that applies everywhere. And so then I look for places where it doesn't, but my first assumption is that it's true. That's contrary in a lot of cases to what the experts say, of course.
Which flies completely in the face of academia.
Which is why I didn't last long there, didn't last long in the Army, which of course then says, okay, well, Maceo, how did you get to be an entrepreneur? It's like, well, just listen to me talk for 5 minutes and you're going to see that if I'm not if I'm not running something, or at least in a group that is willing to give me some grace, with my personality quirks, it's not going to work. So very rigid hierarchical structures like the physics department in MIT or fill in the blank university. Yeah, I am not going to go very far at all.
Well, that's entrepreneurship, isn't it? That's that mindset.
It can be. So let's talk about that. So when I've actually worked with a lot of teachers. So my e-learning company, of course, it was an e-learning company, which attracted teachers into it. And what I always endeavored to recommend to them was that they partnered with somebody. And it's because the people that are the best teachers don't necessarily make the best, this is going to sound really abrasive at first, they don't make the best decision makers when it comes to business. And it's because in business, the outside environment, so the competition, your customers, everybody, they don't care. Like, they don't care what your opinion is. They don't care if your rent is due. They don't care if your lights are going to get turned off. They don't care how beautiful of a person you are. What the customer cares about is, does the thing you're offering add value to my life? And then what your competitors care about is that you would go away and stop bothering them. And so in that environment, the very thing that makes teachers so special can absolutely get in the way, because you're not here to educate your customer. You're here to sell to your customer. And you definitely aren't here to educate your competition unless it's either to sell to you or to go out of business. Right? So but that's not, generally speaking, what teachers are here to do. So I would always endeavor to say, look, partner up with somebody who has, you don't have to go as extreme as me, but have somebody there that can bring in that influence, right? So that way, if you're going too far in educating your customer in your marketing, let's say, they can back it off, or at least say, hey, let's test something where we're not educating as much, or move it to a different place. So education has its place, but you definitely want it to be later in your conversion process. So, I'm definitely not saying that you can't teach. It's just you have to teach at the right place.
Right. Well, it's a testament to teachers' hearts and where they are, which is kind
Without
of where
question.
we be when they're with our children.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So tell us more about your e-learning company. Like, what did you do? What was it? What was the function of it?
Oh man. So that was a real journey. Thank God early on, I ran into so many people that were helpful. And of course, like I said at the intro, they were all educators. Like, that's their heart. And so I remember, so I launched that company 2005, and 2006-ish, I had a woman who had worked her way up from kindergarten, literally into like the college level educator for a long, long time. And she said, I don't know who taught you to teach, but they don't know what they're doing. Right. So she introduced me to lesson plans, and she sent me one link, and I think she knew that I was going to take that link and then go run with it. So that company was molded by the educators that were my customers. And so it started off with really just practicality. When September 11th, 2001 happened, they shut the markets down. The firm that I was trading for, they shut down. My oldest son was brand new at that point, and I had a decision to make. I either leave Arizona, because basically the money left what I call non-money centers. So it went back to Chicago, LA, Detroit, Dallas, New York, etc. Or it just went back into the people's pockets. So I could move to one of those cities or not. And I asked one of my trading mentors, yeah, Larry, what am I going to do? This is really crazy. He said, start a newsletter. I was like, newsletter? What's that? Which of course leads me into digital marketing, because you got to sell the thing. The e-learning company, to now get to your question. So the e-learning company was designed to introduce people to trading. Now I chose the Forex market because at the time that was the biggest trend, or it was the trend with the biggest potential. As an institutional trader, I'd been trading currencies and options on currencies and whatnot for a little while, but the retail public, everybody else had not. And so I saw that from a business standpoint, people are probably going to want to learn about that, and I could make money selling it to them. But I could also make sure that they're, learning the proper trading principles. So I would say really at the heart of it was certainly the capitalist side of me that said, hey, there's money to be found here. But then the coach and teacher side kicked in and said, yeah, and at least somebody needs to be doing it properly. Because the dark side of capitalism is it is very much possible to sell stuff that really doesn't have the ultimate benefit of the person, which would be outright fraud, in mind. And then you've got all the shades in between where, somebody may not really know what they're doing, but they're able to sell really well, which is basically most of the financial industry when it comes to learning how to trade. So part of it was, I'm going to come in, I've got a bit of a hero complex. So I was like, I'm going to come in and, rescue people by giving them the information that they really need. But at the root of it, what made that company work from the customer standpoint was I had some educators that came in and said, Maceo, your lessons suck. Like, you really need to change these around. And so I worked for, 16 hours a day for 2 weeks, revamped all of my educational materials. And my marker for success was that this woman, her name's Mary, that she would say, okay, that works.
That is awesome. Well, it's really true because there's a science. I mean, I'm a little biased here. There's a science of learning because my doctorate's in instructional design. So there's
absolutely
science there. But I get it. I am so excited because I've been just waiting for the podcast where I get to talk about quantum physics. It's like my little obsession that I have. So that is really cool. We've never had anyone on. So this is neat. We've never had anyone on before that because in the education world and kind of the people don't think of entrepreneurship when they think of Wall Street, right?
Right. They don't.
And trading. And in fact, it's kind of like this evil, scary place, right? So It's really cool. I was glad to have you on to just talk about how that is also a very entrepreneurial journey. And I didn't know this. I didn't know that you had educators working with you to help you build this company. I think I've bought some of those shady ones. It's like I was trying to learn trading at one point, and as the person who never quit school, I'm like, I have to have a course, and I went through a couple of courses, and I'm like, this again, the candlestick thing. So it just didn't help me. I wish I'd stumbled upon yours. So is that what Insider Code is?
Yes, so the Insider Code was the name of that particular product. So the flagship product that really helped to launch the company was called the Insider Code. And it, the marketing behind it, I had a little code name, and it wasn't marketed as me out there. It was very much a study in how to market something properly. And so that company gave us the initial cash flow, the initial impetus, if you will. And where I took the company was into e-learning, because I realized that e-learning or online learning was absolutely where the market was going. So this leads me also to my biggest mistake. So the numbers on this are going to sound really impressive, but there's also a cautionary tale here. So I started with a $25,000 loan. I literally went up to my stepdad and said, give me $25,000. Through my mother, of course, because I'm smart. So he wrote me the check, and before he died, he would continue to say, I still don't know why I gave you that check, which I paid him back and bought him a car. I paid him back. Anyway, so $25,000 loan, because I was able to capture a powerful trend. Within a year, we were at 23 million, I think, in sales. And we had multiple exits. So what is an exit? And this strikes to the heart of, we'll call it the entrepreneurial lesson plan, right? So one of the things you have to think about when you're designing a lesson plan is, where do you want to end up? Like, that was the first thing that Mary said. She's like, Maceo, what's the purpose of each section? Like, what do you want the person to get as they step through it? And then what should they know at the end so you can test them? I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So I actually have started applying that to everything, including the entrepreneurial journey. So as educators, they've been doing this for longer. It's just, let me try and morph their thinking. So if you start a company, you have to understand, well, what are the steps that you're going to be going on? But then more importantly, at the end of this thing, what is it? Like, you personally, if you're the educator with a business, what do you get? What could you be tested on at the end? Well, no, this is more than just a philosophical question. Because if you start filling in the blanks like, well, it's going to be, management expertise, if these are all soft skills, my next question would be, okay, what's that worth? So if we pause and think about that and say, well, it depends. So if it's all soft skills, then what you've really done is made yourself into a better employee, possibly. Or you've set yourself up for the next business. But that's an important distinction, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So if you've done that, then I would say, okay, well then with that endpoint, what can you expect along the way? Can you expect to make a lot of money? If at the end of it, you're going to have these skills which are positioning you to be this business leader, then it would make sense that along the way, you're not going to reap the same rewards as somebody who had those skills and put them at the beginning. So Jack Welch, after 30 years in business, is a much different value proposition to a company than Jack Welch is when he's 18. Right. Same thing goes in school. I mean, you don't give a sixth grader a calculus book. Well, not necessarily because they can't understand it, they're just not ready for it. But then also if someone is learning calculus and along the way you're testing them and they're like not getting it, let's not continue. Let's give you some, remedial education or, let's bring you up to speed, right? Okay, so when you're looking at that process and you're understanding where your endpoint is, you get to some of what people miss about Wall Street is Wall Street starts with that end in mind. They assume you understand that this is a value proposition which involves selling something to the massive public out there. And so if you're coming into that environment without that understanding, then you're missing literally the point, which is you need to come to them with something that is going to transmute, to use the alchemist term, it's going to transmute into this thing that has value, which we call stock. So that is a sort of a quasi-philosophical way of talking about what is missing in people's mindset when they think about Wall Street or they think about an exit, which leads me to my mistake. So we had a couple of exits in there, and I realize I'm jumping around. I'll tie it all in later on as we go. So we had a couple of exits. We went to a group of entrepreneurs in Florida. We agreed on a sales price. It was a couple $100 million. The numbers really don't matter. They were big, right? And then we had another exit planned. So we went then to another private group, and that exit was around, adjusted numbers were more like 600 million. At the time, it was like 420 or 430 million. Well, the problem was who we were selling to. So if you and I, Toy, said, okay, your company is worth $400 million, we could do that, right? Yeah, of course, we could agree to that. Now, I could see the skepticism on your face. So why are you skeptical? Well, it's because we inherently realize, well, big deal. We're on a Zoom call. Two of us agreed it's worth $400 million. See, yes, that's the point. So if you're creating a company, if it's got value to two people on a Zoom call, that's different than if it has value to, say, a private group of investors in Florida, right? And that's different than saying it's got value to the world, which would be Wall Street. And so what Wall Street does is it bridges all of these gaps in value, right? So how do you establish value? Who says it's worth that? The exchange says it's worth that. Well, why do they say that? Because they have all these rules which say you can only use this accounting system. If you get $1 in, you have to specifically tell people where it's cut up. 10 cents goes to employees, etc. And so because the rules are set, then everybody can agree on the value. Well, if that's your endpoint, how would you design the lesson? Well, obviously, at some point in your company, you'd have to say, hey, folks, we got to change our accounting plan. Why? Well, because our endpoint is this publicly traded company thing, and you've got to follow GAAP to get into that club. So it makes sense as a system when you think about it that way, but too often it's mystified, or we think it's hidden behind some veil. It really is more about the concept of this value. What's it going to be worth? So let's go one step or we'll go a shade different than Wall Street, which is private equity and venture capital. So my mistake was not going to the venture capital system. Why? Because the venture capital system is connected to this other value system called the public market. So if you could go to the teachers union, right? And the teachers union could say, your company is worth $300 million, right? Okay, great. And I would say that, my mom used to say this all the time, that the $1.50 will get you a cup of coffee. You can tell where my mom's thinking was with coffee. It's more like $3 nowadays. So that and $3 could get you a cup of coffee, right? Well, if you go to the venture capitalist, because they're part of this system that leads to the public markets, you have this value chain where it's like, okay, well, these venture capitalists said the company was worth 20 million. And then we grew and they said it was worth 50. And we grew and they said it was worth 100. All of that is important. It's important because of the people that are involved and because that system is designed to work in that way so that the system is designed to work in such a way, just like a lesson plan. So by the time you get to the public market, the people that are going to invest in you can backtrack. They say, okay, well, great. This IPO says the company is going to be worth 38 billion. Well, why? Oh, because it went through all these stages and these stages were documented and you can do your due diligence. You can call someone on the phone and say, hey, what happened here? And how did you guys adjust to that? And what were the business mechanics that led to the decision? So if you're outside of that system entirely, like we were, it's impossible to just break in and say, knock, 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 we're worth this much money, lead us to the public market.
Is that like the Series A stuff? Is that where that all comes from? Because I don't understand this.
Yeah, so
a little bit of knowledge there.
Then stop me if I get too far in the weeds. If you go to venture capitalists, the first rule, you've got to think from their side of the table. Venture capitalists are a lot like stock traders. Stock traders with portfolios will say, okay, I've got $100,000. I'm going to divide it on all of these different stocks. And what you're saying in that case is I can't bet on a single stock because I don't know if it's going to work or not. And so quote unquote portfolio theory with some statistical nonsense, because portfolio theory is pretty flawed, as you can imagine, I would say that, right? But raw portfolio theory doesn't work as it's put out there, because what it's basically saying is divide your money among a bunch of stocks and hopefully one of them is going to work out, basically. And I know people are going to yell and scream and tear out their hair and rip their clothes. And just go with me here. Venture capitalists are much like that. They're going to make all these bets on different companies. And what they're thinking is, if they're going to invest in your company, so let's say you and I decide we're going to start a company. So we go to Sequoia Capital, one of the top venture capital firms in the country, and they love us. Like, wow, you guys have a great idea. Why do they say that? Is it because we're wonderful people? Well, maybe, but no. It's because what we said to them as an idea, when it gets to the end place, which is public market, is going to return to the fund in profit, it's an important distinction, the entire fund. Let me say that in more plain English. That's like you saying, I'm only going to invest in these portfolio of stocks if each one will make me back my $100,000, potentially. That's a different animal. And that's actually more like, I would say, a successful trader would think of it. Right? So where portfolio theory breaks down is it doesn't take into account your risk dollars. Right? So if I have $100,000, spread it out over 10 stocks, I've got 10,000 in each, right? Did I get my math right? I think I did. Yeah. Okay. I can't do math and talk. It's a weakness of mine. So a trader would say, okay, if I'm going to risk all of that 10,000, like I'm literally going to let it go down to zero, then if I get a winner, it needs to at least have the potential to make the $100,000. Again, a very gross oversimplification, but that's how they look at it. So if Sequoia has $1 billion and they divide that over 1,000 companies that they invest $1 million in, then each of those $1 million investments has to have the potential to grow to $1 billion. That's the quick and easy math. Now, where most people go wrong is they don't build their business plan like a lesson plan, right? It's like, okay, where are you going to start? Well, we're starting with an idea. Where are you going to end up? With $1 billion in profit for the hedge fund, for the venture capital fund. Just knowing those three pieces of information, you can back into exactly what information you need to give to them. And more importantly, to judge your own idea realistically, to understand if the pitch even makes sense. Not in, hey, we're going into a $50 billion market and all we have to do is get, X percent. Well, okay. Everybody can say that. That's no different than, old Albert Einstein sitting in his patent clerk office saying, Michelson Morley just proved that, the ether exists and, the sun revolves around the earth. I don't believe in that. So how do I prove that wrong? That's literally what Einstein did. And he kind of revealed that in his later writings. But instead of looking at the situation, now let me flip back to business owners. I just threw a hand grenade into the room with that last one. Going back to business, most people don't approach it in the way that I just outlined, which is, let me figure out what the people want who I'm selling to, which would be venture capital. And then let me back into a real solution for them. This is business. If you understand what I just said, you will be able to go through any list of products, any list of ideas, and with a very little amount of work, act as if you were going to sell it to a venture capital fund, and then have not only a working business plan, but also exactly what benchmarks you need to hit along the way to understand if it's working. Well, that is in essence the grand unifying theory of business. Well, yeah, it is. So why don't more people do that? Yeah. Well, first of all, because it's really hard. And what you're going to find out, just like all traders will, is that not every idea will do that. So not every idea is going to return $1 billion. Well, does that mean it's a waste of time? I don't know. It depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to be a bazillionaire, then I would say no. You have to keep working until you have something that fits, not that you fit it, but so that your theory legitimately produces the result. Or you've got to say through that process, you're probably going to find a couple of ideas that are going to return, 20 or 30 million. So then don't go talk to Sequoia. Go look through the vast menagerie of venture capital funds and find a smaller one. And so find one that's 30 or $40 million. Say, hey, I've got this idea. It's not going to fit Sequoia because they're a multi-billion-dollar fund. It's going to fit you because you're a $30 million fund, and I think I can return your fund. I will bet somebody $100, and I have $100 bill in my wallet for this purpose. It's literally lasted 20 years because I rarely lose this bet. I will bet $100 that if you do the work I just said and you approach a venture capital fund with that script that I just gave, which is, this isn't going to fit Sequoia. They're a multi-billion-dollar fund. I think it fits your fund because my idea will likely return your fund. They will talk to you. Well, why? Well, because in shorthand, you've just communicated to them a massive amount of information. You've communicated to them that you understand their dilemma. What do they value? Which is the root of selling. So you've also demonstrated that you understand how to sell. So if you're talking about, well, how do you educate people? Well, I've then got to think about, if I were going to educate somebody, what end state do I want them in? Well, I want them in an end state where they can demonstrate all this stuff, right? Well, yeah. Okay. So then I need to figure out, well, then how do I back into where they're starting? So that hopefully I'm giving the educators that are listening to this a bit of a hair-raising experience, because when you understand the power you have as an educator in communicating in a way that produces results, that almost is by definition what businesses are supposed to do. It's just making a few tweaks and understanding and an application to take those skills and put them into the business environment.
That's fascinating. And, when we talk to schools, we often bring up the fact that venture capital is very difficult to come by. And most businesses that start, or we call it the triple F model. They get their capital from friends, families, and
fools.
But that's cool.
Yes, yeah, right.
That's a lot of the time, a lot of time where people start and then maybe move on later to what you're talking about, which is like the granddaddy of the situation. But can you talk about how that applies on a much smaller scale? So say I am a yoga master and I decide to open, not only I open a little yoga studio, but I don't expect to maybe make my money all there, but I open, I want to do online courses for my yoga studio. Yep. I'm not a yoga master, but if I was, so I learned some things and I learned how to, put this thing online, and I'm really not thinking of that end goal, whatever it is. I might just want to make, 6 figures with my yoga studio and be like a happy yogi running around to Peru every now and then.
Right.
So how does that apply in the terms that I'm not even thinking about a venture capitalist. Right. I got a credit card and a rich daddy.
Yes. Okay. So the good part about this, and I think what convinced me that this theory it's one of those things that's true, like gravity, right? We know that gravity is there. We don't have to debate on whether or not it's true. Meaning gravity itself, we understand that it's there. Is that this theory displays what's called fractal nature, which means I can take it from a $1 billion venture capital idea down to the example that you said. You just use the same methodology. So instead of saying, okay, I need to return the fund, you need to understand what your number is. Now, here's where people go wrong is they really don't understand what the number means. They say, okay, I want to make $100,000. My challenge to them would be, is that $100,000 in your bank account at the end of the year? And if they say yes, I'm going to say, okay, is that before or after expenses? Oh, so you've got to delve into the detail, right? So I went over the theory in broad strokes, but those methodologies lead to these other things naturally, if you will. Meaning, you want the $100,000 a year. The way most people think about that is, well, it's $100,000 a year because, not because at the end of the year you're going to have the $100,000 in the bank, but over the year you're going to accumulate that money and you're going to spend it as it comes in. Now, of course, I would say, well, as a business, do you want to spend your money as you make it, or do you want a cushion? So I would add some additional questions into this to try and make the model more robust, meaning it's not as easy to fail. So we would start with $100,000. You added in there, go to Peru. So I would say, okay, let's figure out how much that's going to cost. Where are we going to stay? Let's just get some rough numbers. We'll go on a TripAdvisor or something and just get rough numbers. Let's say $5,000. So I need $100,000 because I'm really thinking about spending it. That's going to cover mortgage, car payment, insurance, food, clothing, stuff like that. My nut. All right, so I've got that plus the $5,000. Then what you've got to look at is, all right, well, what is what they call a total addressable market? If you're talking about the internet, well, okay, don't get crazy and say it's everybody on the internet, because I just don't do yoga. I do lift weights, so I do Olympic weightlifting and other stuff, which means I'm not that flexible. So part of it is I'm super competitive. And when I see these 16-year-old people more flexible than I am, I get really upset. So I just avoid it, to be honest with you. So it's not everybody on the market. It's a smaller chunk of that. And this is the rub, whether you're talking to a VC or you're talking to yourself as VC. Now that introduces something really important. Most people would go less wrong if they started from the standpoint of create a clone of yourself and make your clone come to you for the money. Where now you're looking at your bank account and saying, okay, yeah, I do have a little bit to invest, but what, why am I going to give it to you? Oh, because I'm going to be this yogi. And, so if you give yourself the spiel in that light, oh, wait a minute. Like your answer is probably going to be no. Like, no, that's a crazy plan. Like, how are you going to get your customers? Oh, I'm just going to have, put great YouTube videos up. Okay. There are 90 million people with yoga YouTube videos. So if you can go through that exercise of cloning yourself and then have you ask yourself for the money for the business, it'll trick your brain into looking at it like a venture capitalist and thereby give you some of these answers. So your total addressable market is not everybody online. It's a subset.
I'm going to do yoga for weightlifters.
I was hoping you were going to say that. That I would say so let's take that to the next step. Yoga for weightlifters, right? So the next step would be, let's go out there and talk to some weightlifters. So on other podcasts, what people have asked me is, what would you say to somebody whose business is failing? I say it's the same thing I would say to somebody whose business is starting. You're thinking too broadly, right? So if you're in a business, my advice to you would be is follow what good traders know. Good traders know that profits feel easy. Why is that? If I buy something and I'm going to make a profit, I need someone to buy at a higher price and a higher price and a higher price. And I need people to keep buying because when I sell, I need someone to buy from me, right? That's easy, right? I'm not doing any work. It's not like, I'm calling people up and, beating the bushes, as they say. It's just flowing. The market's flowing. If it's tough, it's like, oh man, every day is like, oh, it's inching up. It's like, sell it. I mean, it's just that easy. Sell it. Should have been gone. Why? Because we don't have what we need, which is somebody else buying at a higher price and a higher price and a higher price. So how does that come back to business? It's like, well, if you're going to scale as opposed to grow, scaling is done to you. So let's look at Zoom. Or let's look at just e-commerce in general. Rewind to last year about this time. I actually had to get off of some of the Twitter feeds because the e-commerce people were bragging about how great they were. And I said, guys, everybody is at home. A lot of places are forced to not leave their house. Where do you think they're going to buy? They're going to pick up the phone? No, they're going to go online. So it's not you, it's the environment. So all those people scaled, they didn't grow. They scaled because people were making it easy. Right. It's a subtle distinction that comes from my trading background. But that's what most people think about. So most people say, oh, I'm going to be this yogi. Why? Because they saw some channel that went from 100,000 subscribers to 1 million, especially in the last year. And now they're thinking, oh my gosh, I could be sitting rich. And even worse, all the knuckleheads who are selling stuff in e-commerce are pointing to their numbers and saying, look, I just got 1 million subscribers. I'm like, okay, great. You got 1 million subscribers when everybody was at home. They couldn't go to the movie theater because the movie theater was closed. They didn't have to go to school. They didn't have to go to work. What are they going to do? They're going to sit around like everybody else in front of their little tablet. Well, I'm bored, so let me go through, YouTube videos and, oh yeah, I'll subscribe to that. They got scaled, but did they grow? No, they didn't. They didn't grow. Growth actually takes work. You don't grow a tree or a plant or anything for that matter without putting in work. And I'm using work as a physics term. Work means you're putting energy into a system. So if you want to scale, you have to grow at the same time. What are you growing? You're growing the systems to support the thing. So you want to talk about taking stuff from outside. Here in Arizona, we had a failed experiment called the biodome. Why did it fail? It failed because the biologists didn't know what the heck they were doing. Big shocker. And they didn't think about putting wind in the environment. So the trees grew and then fell over. Shock. Why? Well, because nobody stopped to think that in a natural environment, as a tree is growing, the wind's blowing it back and forth, right? that strengthens the tree. Well, what they proved is that the outside world is a system, and it's a system that you can't take in isolation. That's what they proved. Now, they don't like it when you say that because it has a whole lot of other implications which really make them nervous, which, as you can imagine, I don't care if they get nervous. I've already thrown several grenades in. I'm continuing to throw them. So as a kid, I saw that. I'm like, well, of course, that totally makes sense. So that is an example of how our businesses will react. So if you scale and you haven't grown the systems to support it, what's going to happen? It's going to fall over. So mark my words, you're going to see all these e-commerce companies and all people who scaled because of COVID, that because they didn't grow are simply going to fall over. So back to our yoga example. If you're in this environment, I would say you need to understand those distinctions, right? Are you wanting to be the yogi because you've seen these other channels scale? If you have, then you're running the risk of jumping into something expecting a result based on an environment that you didn't understand. Now, the one question would be, well, gosh, Maceo, are you saying everybody has to agree with you or know your theories to actually be successful? I'm saying no. If you have that trio that I described earlier, which was, your start point, your end point, and with that venture capitalist what they want, you can back into this information because it's going to force you to write down a number, right? And the number is that $1 billion, or in this case, 100,000 plus $5,000 for our trip to Peru. Okay. So now let's get practical. You said yoga for weightlifters. I would say, awesome. Now we have a starting point where we can actually go out into the world and either do the grunt work and go through and see, okay, how many weightlifting web pages are there? How many Facebook groups talk about weightlifting? How many YouTube channels are there for weightlifting? Well, why are we doing that? Well, we're doing that because that's our addressable market, right? You want to write down how many subscribers they have. Not that you're adding it up, but just so you want to get this into you and get a feel for this. So write this stuff down, which is ironically, I'm actually going back to the work that I actually did to start my business and why. I didn't want to be able to add up these numbers of subscribers or newsletter buyers or anything. I wanted to get it into my brain because of my educators. They taught me that my conscious expression is very little of what my brain can actually do. And a lot of the work's going on behind the scenes in our quote subconscious. So as a kid, I said, oh, okay, then that means I just need to tell my subconscious to do all the work. So I want to get all this information, write down how many channels there are for weightlifting, how many subscribers they have. The beauty of the digital environment is you can get tools to get even more information. So you can figure out, well, how fast are they getting subscribers if you want? You don't have to. You can just deal with the easy stuff on the surface. So if after that you see, man, I stopped counting it, 500 Facebook groups and 1,000 YouTube videos and 50,000, I went into Google and searched for weightlifting and yoga and it said 2 million websites. Okay, what have you just done? You've shown that there's an audience. What the VCs would roughly say, total addressable market. Mm-hmm. The next step, again, thinking in a lesson plan way, is to go in and figure out, okay, well, where are these people starting? Are they starting with some knowledge about yoga? And then where do you want them to be? So we've literally just jumped from, are there people that I can go talk to, down to where those people are? Because now we're into the value proposition. And then you can figure out, why would they want it? You can understand the market better. But as a byproduct of this methodology, I don't need to teach you sales. I don't need to distract you for 4 years, which, by the way, this is getting to why I dropped out of the whole e-learning market, is it's very much about keeping you in their system and keeping you buying their stuff instead of just giving you a basic methodology that'll work and saying, hey, go out and go forth and conquer. So if you follow this method, you don't need to, quote, learn how to sell. All you have to do is understand what your market wants, what's their goal, and then how your lesson plan is going to take them from where they are to where at the end of it, it's not what you want, right? So in our educational system, it's the board of education, so this outside group says, this is where we want our students. I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying that's the way it is. So now you as the educator can say, okay, well, wait a minute. If somebody's paying me directly for it, I need to recognize that it's where they want to be. So if you just make that simple shift and in your lesson plan, go from where are they now and where do they want to be, and you supply that to them, you're done.
Hi, friends. I am totally breaking in on this awesome conversation with Maceo. And I want to tell you that we are going to have a part 2. We try to keep our conversations at a drive time, 30 to 45 minute chunk. But this conversation was super cool and I want to keep it going. So I'm stopping it halfway, cliffhanger, and you will be able to finish it on our next episode. So I hope that you join us. He has so much more cool things to share, and I appreciate all of you. Have an awesome day.